beginning. The room was thick with static, a familiar presence that had become both Elias's companion and tormentor. His fingers danced over the array of knobs and switches, each adjustment coaxing the fractured signals closer to coherence. The cluttered studio, bathed in the cold blue light of aging monitors and tangled cables, felt like the nerve center of a fragile bridge between worlds. "Hold steady," Elias whispered to himself, eyes narrowing as he watched the waveform dance erratically across the screen. The voices, once indecipherable shards of sound buried beneath relentless interference, began to emerge with startling clarity. They wove together a tapestry of desperation, hope, and silent suffering that transcended the static. Mara leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her sharp eyes reflecting a mixture of skepticism and growing concern. "It's more than noise now," she said quietly. "You're really hearing them." Elias didn't respond immediately, his focus absolute. The voices overlapped, a chorus of fragile pleas that seemed to echo from a realm caught between existence and oblivion. Each phrase was a thread, and Elias was painstakingly weaving them into a coherent narrative. The trapped realm and echo of the city's storms and shadows was alive with silent agony. "Doctor." Kalen Sato entered quietly, his pale frame almost ghost-like in the subdued light. He approached the holographic displays with a practiced hand, eyes scanning the shifting waveforms. "Fascinating," he murmured, fingers tracing the pulses that pulsed in rhythm with the distant thunder. "These frequencies. They're not just random noise. They're structured, purposeful." Elias glanced up, a flicker of hope lighting his tired eyes. "It's a message. More than that, a cry for rescue." Mara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension thickening the air. "If we can understand it, maybe we can help. But this will bring them down on us harder. The silent authority won't like this." Elias nodded, the weight of their unspoken fears pressing heavily. Yet, in the midst of the storm's roar and the persistent hum of static, a fragile connection had been forged, one that promised salvation or destruction. Hours passed as Elias synchronized transmissions, each successful merge unraveling new layers of the trapped realm's story. The voices spoke of confinement, loss, and an unyielding hope for freedom. With every fragment pieced together, Elias felt the boundaries between his reality and theirs blur, the emotional intensity binding him closer to their fate. In the quiet moments between broadcasts, the studio seemed to breathe with the static's pulse, shadows lengthening and retreating like spectral witnesses. Elias's mind swirled with images of the trapped souls, their silent suffering etched into the very fabric of the signals. Mara's presence was a steady anchor. "You can't do this alone," she reminded him gently, her voice a lifeline against the encroaching darkness. Dr. Sato, ever the scientist, continued to analyze the data, offering technical insights that deepened their understanding, but also underscored the peril of their endeavor. "The storms create a liminal space," he explained, "a fragile boundary that these broadcasts are exploiting, but it's unstable. Too much interference, and the whole thing could collapse." The realization tightened the knot in Elias's chest. Each step forward was a gamble, a dance on the edge of oblivion. Yet the voices, once faint whispers, had become a chorus of urgency that he could no longer ignore. As the synchronized broadcast reached its crescendo, Elias slumped into his chair, overwhelmed by the flood of emotion. The voices echoed in his mind, their silent pleas now a haunting symphony that refused to be silenced. Mara placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "We'll figure this out," she promised. "Together." But even as hope flickered in the storm-lit room, the shadow of the silent authority loomed ever closer, their cold interference a reminder that this fragile connection might be the city's last. And somewhere beyond the static, the voices waited united, desperate, and watching. The storm raged on, and with it, the unyielding human urge to reach beyond the known. The moment the monitors went dark, A deafening silence filled Elias's studio. 1 second, the screens were alive with the fractured waveforms of his recordings. The next, a void swallowed every flicker of light and sound. An unnatural quiet settled over the room, broken only by the distant roar of the relentless electrical storm thrashing the city outside. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. Each beat a frantic countdown to an unknown threat closing in. "They've cut the signal," Mara said sharply, her voice slicing through the stillness as she slammed the studio door behind her. Her sharp eyes darted around the cramped room, taking in the dead equipment and the faint hum of static that now seemed a cruel mockery of their efforts. Elias ran his fingers through his disheveled hair, the weight of the blackout pressing down on him like the storm itself. "It's more than a blackout," he muttered. "They want to erase everything we've uncovered." Mara's jaw tightened. "It's the silent authority. Agent Crow's fingerprints are all over this. They don't want these voices heard." Outside, the city was plunged into darkness. Streetlights winked out one by one, and the usual hum of urban life stuttered into an eerie lull. The storm's electric fury seemed to pulse in tandem with the blackout, as if the city itself was caught in a sinister embrace between natural chaos and human control. "We need to move," Mara urged, her voice low but urgent. "They'll be here any minute." Elias grabbed his coat, the fabric heavy and damp from the storm's persistent drizzle. Together, they slipped out through the back exit, the city's shadows swallowing them whole. The alley was slick with rain, the smell of ozone thick in the air. Distant thunder rumbled, punctuating the tension that coiled in Elias's gut like a living thing. From the corner of his eye, Elias spotted the telltale glint of drone eyes, mechanical watchers, unleashed by the silent authority to hunt them down. The drone's whirring blades cut through the heavy air as they homed in on his position. "Split up," Mara hissed, pulling Elias behind a dumpster. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, hearts pounding a frantic rhythm sensed to the storm's fury. Elias's mind raced. The blackout had been a calculated strike, designed not only to disrupt his work, but to isolate and intimidate him. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, a fierce ember of defiance burned within him. The voices trapped within the static depended on him, and he would not be silenced. Hours later, as the city's lights flickered back to life and the storm began to wane, Elias and Mara regrouped in a hidden safe house. Their faces were pale, shadows etched deep beneath their eyes. Yet beneath the exhaustion lay a hardened resolve. "This changes everything," Elias said quietly, staring out at the recovering skyline. "They're not just suppressing information. They're trying to erase a truth that could unravel everything." Mara nodded. "We have to be smarter, more careful, but we fight. We expose this, no matter what." The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered. The battle lines were drawn in static and silence, and Elias knew the war for the voices beyond the storm was only just beginning. As dawn threatened to break, a new frequency hummed faintly in the back of Elias's mind, a fragile thread of hope woven through the oppressive quiet. The silent authority had cast a dark shadow over the city, but within that darkness, the signal remained alive, waiting to be heard. Elias closed his eyes, tuning his senses to the whisper beneath the roar. Somewhere beyond the blackout, beyond the storm, the trapped voices called out, and he would answer. The city was a fractured mosaic of light and shadow, a place where technology and nature clashed in a perpetual battle. Tonight, the balance had been violently tipped. The sudden blackout was not just an attack on equipment, it was a message. The silent authority was watching, controlling, and silencing with ruthless precision. Elias and Mara's narrow escape was a testament to their resolve, but also a stark warning. The forces arrayed against them were vast and merciless. The studio, once a sanctuary of sound and discovery, was now a battleground scarred by the echoes of a war fought in frequencies and shadows. Yet, even as the city's pulse flickered uncertainly in the aftermath of the assault, Elias felt a strange kinship with the silence. It was not empty. It was charged with potential. The static held secrets, residual energy from the lost transmissions, and perhaps a pathway forward. Mara's steady presence grounded him, a beacon amid the chaos. Despite their differences, her skepticism, his obsession, they were bound by a shared purpose to uncover the truth hidden beneath layers of interference. Agent Crow's cold, mechanical voice haunted Elias's thoughts. It was a symbol of the impersonal force that sought to control knowledge and suppress connection. But Elias was no longer just a passive listener. He was a participant in a larger struggle that transcended the boundaries of worlds. Inside the safe house, the air was thick with the smell of brewing coffee and quiet conversation. Plans were whispered, equipment repurposed, and alliances forged in the crucible of necessity. The fight against the silent authority was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming the right to hear the unheard. As the first light of dawn filtered through cracked windows, Elias felt the weight of his mission settle firmly on his shoulders. The storm had passed, but the real tempest was yet to come. And when it did, he would be ready to face the shadow that loomed over the city and the voices caught within its static veil. The battle for connection, for truth, and for freedom was just beginning. The static was louder than usual in the cramped studio that evening, a relentless hum that filled every crevice with its unyielding presence. Elias sat hunched over his console, eyes bloodshot and fixed on the erratic waveforms that danced across the screen. His fingers moved almost mechanically, adjusting dials, replaying fragments of the hidden frequency, chasing after voices that seemed to slip further away with every listen. Mara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him with a blend of frustration and fear. The low light cast angular shadows across her sharp features, the short strands of hair framing her face like a shield. "Elias," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the static haze, "you need to stop. That obsession is killing you." He didn't look up. "I'm close, Mara. I can feel it. These voices, they're more than just noise. They're trapped, and I'm the only one who can help." "You're losing yourself," she pressed, stepping forward, the concern in her eyes unmistakable. "You haven't slept properly in days. You're talking about hallucinations like they're facts. And what about us? You're shutting me out." For a moment, Elias's hands faltered on the controls. The static filled the silence between them, a relentless reminder of the world he was so determined to save and the one he was fracturing around himself. "I'm not shutting you out," he whispered, voice cracking. "I just need you to understand. This frequency, it's a lifeline. If I don't reach them, no one will." Mara's expression softened, but her resolve remained firm. "And what if you lose yourself in the process? What good is saving others if you're gone?" The storm outside raged on, lightning illuminating the city through the grimy windows, flickering like fractured memories. Elias turned to her then, eyes searching. "I don't know how to stop. Not now." Their conversation spiraled into silence as the weight of unspoken fears settled between them. Days bled into nights with little rest, Elias's mind a battleground of static and shadows. The voices grew louder in his head, sometimes indistinguishable from the storm's own howling. Paranoia crept in, twisting his perceptions. He found himself double-checking equipment, suspecting invisible watchers, questioning even Mara's intentions. One night, on the rain-soaked rooftop overlooking the city, Mara confronted him again. The neon signs flickered erratically, casting eerie glows on their faces. "You're slipping away from me," she said, voice raw with emotion. "If you disappear into this obsession, I don't know if I can follow." Elias's reply was a whisper torn between hope and despair. "I'm trying to save them. But maybe I'm losing myself instead." The storm's electric charge crackled in the air, mirroring the tension between them. They stood apart, silhouettes against the fractured cityscape, the distance between them as palpable as the static that enveloped everything. Back inside, Elias's trembling hands grappled with the equipment, desperate to hold on to the fragile tether of reality. The broadcasts warped and shifted, bleeding into his thoughts, the line between what was real and imagined blurring with every pulse. Mara watched him, heart heavy, torn between fear for his sanity and unwavering loyalty. In the quiet afterward, at Mara's apartment, the city's storm dimmed to a distant murmur. They sat together in fragile silence, the room thick with the weight of what had been said and left unsaid. In that stillness, a tentative understanding began to take root, fragile as the dawnlight creeping through the blinds. But the fractures remained, a reminder that their bond, like the signals Elias chased, was fragile and fraught with uncertainty. The path ahead was unclear, the cost of connection steep, and the storm both external and internal far from over. As the night deepened, Elias's thoughts raced. Could he find balance between the consuming obsession and the fragile ties that anchored him? Or would the static finally claim him, silencing both his voice and the calls he was desperate to answer? The hum of the city outside whispered promises of both hope and dread, a reminder that some connections demanded sacrifice beyond measure. And as the first faint crackle of an elusive signal surfaced amidst the static, Elias knew the next step would define not just his fate, but the fate of the voices trapped beyond the storm. He reached for the controls once more, determination flickering in his tired eyes. The journey was far from over. The rooftop was an island amid the tempest, a battleground where storm and city clashed in a cacophony of raw energy. Elias Vorn stood at its edge, the modified transdimensional device strapped securely to his chest, glowing faintly with a cold blue light that seemed almost unnatural against the dark, flickering sky. Lightning stitched jagged seams across the horizon, illuminating the endless sheets of rain that hammered down like 1,000 tiny fists. The static was louder here, a deafening hum that thrummed in his bones and whispered secrets in every crackle. His breath came in ragged bursts, the cold air burning his lungs with each inhale. The city sprawled beneath him, a maze of neon lights and shadowed alleys, but it felt distant, disconnected from the tempest that raged above. Tonight was the night he would cross the threshold, descend into the liminal space that had mocked him through the static for so long. Elias Mara's voice crackled through the earpiece, steady but strained, the storms intensifying. "Are you sure you want to do this now?" He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the device's controls. "I have to. If I don't take the step now, the connection will be lost. The voices, they're fading." A sharp crack of thunder rolled overhead, shaking the very air. Elias pressed the activation button. The device pulsed, a wave of electromagnetic energy rippling outward, distorting the space around him. The world blurred, colors bleeding into one another as edges lost definition. He felt his body dissolve into the noise, the tactile reality of the rooftop slipping away. Suddenly, he was somewhere else. Or perhaps everywhere at once. The liminal space was a fractured mirror of the city. Buildings twisted into impossible angles, their surfaces shimmering like heat haze. Neon signs flickered erratically, their messages garbled and half-formed. The sky above was a roiling canvas of static and storm clouds, fractured by jagged bolts of light that seemed to crack the space itself. Voices floated through the haze, fragile, desperate, pleading. They whispered his name, weaving sorrow and hope into their tangled chorus. Elias reached out, trying to grasp the intangible threads, but they slipped through his fingers like smoke. His heart pounded as the boundaries between reality and hallucination blurred. He saw flashes of another world layered beneath this one, shadowy figures trapped behind invisible barriers, eyes wide with silent screams. The static was alive here, a sentient veil that both concealed and imprisoned. Back in the studio, Mara's gaze was fixed on the monitors, her fingers dancing across keyboards as she fought to stabilize the feed. The storm's interference was relentless, scrambling. The air inside the liminal zone was thick with a palpable static, yet beneath it pulsed an eerie silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. Shadows flickered and shifted around me like restless phantoms, their forms half glimpsed, yet unmistakably human. Each step I took sent ripples through the ambient hum, fracturing the tenuous veil separating our worlds. I gripped the worn edges of my portable receiver, its screen flickering erratically, as if struggling to anchor itself in this unstable reality. The trapped voices wove around me, their whispers fragile but insistent. They were not mere echoes, but entities caught in the interstice, their suffering etched in every tremor of the signal. A sudden chill brushed the back of my neck, a presence manifesting just beyond perception. From the shifting gloom emerged a figure, my own reflection, but distorted, spectral, and cold. The doppelganger's eyes bore into me, hollow yet accusing, reflecting the fears and guilt I had buried beneath years of isolation. "Why do you linger here, Elias?" The apparition seemed to ask without words. "What do you hope to save when you yourself are breaking?" I faltered, the weight of my obsession pressing down like the crushing storm outside. The boundary between my mind and the liminal space blurred, hallucinations and reality entwining into a chaotic dance. Yet, within that chaos, I found a sliver of clarity, a purpose that transcended the static noise. Suddenly, a cold mechanical voice cut through the spectral murmurs. Connection unstable. Severance imminent, it intoned, the unmistakable signature of the silent authority. Their presence was a shadow cast over this fragile sanctuary, an oppressive force bent on maintaining the veil between worlds. Their interference grew more aggressive, signals jamming, echoes of digital snarls disrupting the delicate communion I had forged. I fought to steady my breathing, to anchor myself against the rising tide of disorientation. The trapped voices surged in intensity, their pleas a chorus of desperation and hope. I reached out, hands trembling, to touch the flickering forms, ghostly silhouettes, shimmering with ephemeral light. Their eyes, filled with silent suffering, locked onto mine, and in that moment I understood the depth of their imprisonment. Through the haze of static and shadow, I found strength. The spectral reflection of my fears wavered and dissolved as I embraced the connection fully, letting the voices fill the void inside me. This was not merely a battle of technology or will, it was a communion of fractured souls seeking redemption through one another. As the mechanical voice of the silent authority grew louder, threatening to sever the link, I steeled myself for the coming storm. The liminal space trembled, its fragile boundaries quivering under the assault. But I would not yield. For the voices, for the lost, for myself, I would stand against the silence. The echoes of my heartbeat mingled with the distant thunder beyond the veil, a steady reminder that even in the darkest static, life persisted. And with that thought, I pushed forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever lay beyond the storm. The studio was suffocating under a thick blanket of static that no longer whispered but screamed. Elias sat slumped in his chair, eyes fixed on the flickering monitors that had once been his window to another world. Now, they were nothing but broken glass, reflecting a fractured reality. The equipment, once his trusted companion, had betrayed him. Circuits fried, signals drowned in relentless interference. The cold hum of failure filled the room, a mechanical dirge that echoed the turmoil within his mind. He reached out hesitantly, fingers brushing the cracked speaker cone, the last fragile conduit of the voices he had come to know so intimately. The static pulsed ominously, as if mocking his efforts, each wave a reminder of the connection slipping through his grasp. The voices, the desperate pleas, the fragile hopes were now drowned in a void of silence that threatened to consume not just the signals, but his very purpose. Time slipped unnoticed until the door burst open with a sharp crack, rainwater splattering across the warm floorboards. Mara stood there, soaked and breathless, her sharp eyes blazing with urgency. "Elias," she said, voice steady yet edged with worry, "you need to stop this. You need to rest." He shook his head, voice hoarse. "I can't. Not yet. The voices, they're still out there. I have to reach them." Mara stepped closer, her presence a tether to the world he was fading from. "And I'm going to help you. But you can't do this alone." Outside, the city writhed beneath storm-darkened skies, neon lights flickering like dying stars. The oppressive hum of the electrical tempest seeped through the walls, a constant reminder of the forces conspiring to silence him. Minutes later, Dr. Kalen Sato arrived, his pale figure framed by the dim hallway light. He moved with the precision of a surgeon, his fingers deftly adjusting dials and rewiring connections among the tangled mess of equipment. His glasses caught the glow of flickering screens, reflecting a mind grappling with the impossible. "The interference is unlike anything I've seen," he muttered. "It's adaptive, overwhelming. But there's a pattern if we can isolate it. Perhaps we can counteract it." Elias watched, a mix of hope and desperation burning behind tired eyes. The scientist's cold determination was a fragile lifeline in a sea of chaos. Hours passed in a blur of static and whispered calculations. Yet, despite their efforts, the signals remained broken, fragmented beyond comprehension. Elias felt the walls of his sanity closing in, memories and hallucinations blurring the line between reality and the haunting broadcasts. The voices sometimes echoed in his thoughts, distorted cries slipping through the cracks of his fractured mind. In a rare moment of clarity, Elias spoke softly. "What if this is it? What if the static wins?" Mira's hand found his, grounding him. "Then we fight harder, because there's more at stake than just sound. There's hope." The night deepened, the storm outside reaching a crescendo. Elias stared at the darkened monitors, a silent promise forming in his heart. The connection might be broken, but the voices were not lost. Somewhere beyond the storm, beyond the static, they wait, and he would find a way back to them. As the first hints of dawn crept through rain-streaked windows, a faint pulse flickered on the screen, a fragile heartbeat in the void. Elias's breath caught. The signal had not died. Not yet. With renewed resolve, he whispered into the stillness, "I'm coming." The storm raged on, but within the shattered silence, a new hope was born. The studio was a sanctuary of shadows and static, a cocoon where the hum of electricity and the faint crackle of interference were constant companions. Elias sat hunched over his console, fingers trembling slightly as he made final adjustments to the device that had consumed his every waking thought for weeks. The repaired apparatus, a tangled mesh of wires and salvaged components, now pulsed with a steady blue light, a beacon in the otherwise dim and cluttered room. A faint vibration thrummed through the air, a subtle shift in the static that signaled something new, something different. Elias's heart pounded as he leaned in, eyes fixed on the wavering lines across the screen. The familiar hiss of white noise was punctuated by something else, a pattern, a rhythm, a voice. "Listen," Elias whispered, barely daring to break the fragile silence. Mara, standing close behind him, leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing as she scanned the audio waveforms. The room seemed to hold its breath. From the speakers emerged a voice fragile, trembling, layered beneath the interference, but undeniably human. "Help. Trapped. Please." The words were disjointed, fragmented, but their desperate urgency cut through the static like a knife. Mara's breath hitched, a rare crack in her usual pragmatism. "Elias, they're real." Across the room, Dr. Kalen Sato adjusted his glasses, his pale face etched with a mixture of fascination and dread. "This transmission, It's unlike anything I've encountered. The energy signatures suggest a dimensional bleed, an overlap created by the city's storms.